Welcome, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle, and Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are located in Decatur, Georgia, but I'm coming to you live from my house in Atlanta, Georgia. We really wish that we could be with everybody physically and gather in community, but we're really glad to be able to do these virtual events. So we're here today to celebrate Dr. Joy Cox's new book, which is called Fat Girls in Black Bodies, Creating Communities of Our Own. And this event is co-sponsored by the Auburn Avenue Research Library. The Auburn Avenue Research Library has been an amazing virtual event sponsor with us. So like us, they are physically closed for browsing, but they are open online. And one of the amazing things about co-sponsoring with them is that we have a librarian live in the chat with us, helping us out and adding to our conversation. So as you'll see in the chat, they're going to be adding references and resources. I already see they've dropped some stuff around self-love and self-care. That's amazing. They're going to keep doing that. So these are resources that you can click on at various points and just open those windows to come back to once our conversation is over. And just know the librarians at AARL are there and they want to help. So if you're looking for further connection, further reading on this topic and many other topics, just trust they are there and working and really want to be interfacing with the public right now. So let me welcome our guests today. I'm going to introduce our interviewer and conversation partner first. So Makia Green is a queer, non-binary, fat, Black liberation organizer with Black Lives Matter DC and the DC Working Families Party. They are also a lead trainer for Momentum. Makia fights to abolish the prison state, end intra-community violence, and eliminate wealth inequality by facilitating community dialogues, leading direct action, and building coalitions centered in Black joy, healing, and abolition. A New Yorker living in D.C., they joined the movement by co-founding an activist collective in Rochester, New York, during the aftermath of the Ferguson uprising. And they have since then led mass actions such as J20 Resist, Block Devos. Let's all be glad that Devos is on their way out. And hashtag defund MPD. As an activist and organizer, Green's passion is using radical honesty to give others the permission to be themselves unapologetically so that we all have the power to manifest the world within which we want to live. So welcome, Makia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
We're glad you're here. And welcome, Dr. Joy Cox. We're thrilled to be celebrating your book today. So Dr. Cox is a body justice advocate, researcher, and leader who addresses the intersections of race, body size, accessibility, and health. She holds a PhD from Rutgers University, is the host of the Pro-Fat, Pro-Black podcast, Fresh Out the Cocoon, and has been featured in articles by the Huffington Post and Self magazine. Occasionally, Dr. Cox serves on the advisory board for the Association for Size Diversity and Health and is the co-founder of Jabby, a body-inclusive, identity-affirming fitness app. We are thrilled to be celebrating Fat Girls in Black Bodies, Creating Communities of Our Own, which contends with the systemically harmful treatment of fat Black girls and women and the methods through which belonging, resistance, and acceptance can be cultivated. So we're thrilled to have you both here. I'm going to get out of the way, and I just want folks to know at any time you can put a question in the Ask a Question area. That is not disruptive at all. So please just pop those in the chat so that when Makia is ready, they can pull those up.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. Yes. How are you feeling this morning? How are you arriving?
I am okay. It's been not hectic morning, but I've been up for the last couple of hours, just really looking forward to talking to you. And, it's always, I kind of get revved up before events. So I'm excited to be here. How about yourself?
I'm feeling so grateful. Before we came on to speak with you all, I was sharing ways that we met, and I was sharing how, we are a part of wonderful internet community of Black fat femmes who are advocating, who are, starting their own businesses, creating clothing, internet warriors, all these other things, and was just so grateful to meet you, the work that you do and advocacy, from the clothing you create, from your podcast, around, dispelling things around health, the articles that you're a part of, and I'm just grateful to be here with you. I'm wondering if you could share with folks, just some of the things that brought you to wanting to write this book. What brought you to writing Fat Girls in Black Bodies?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, so one part of Fat Girls and Black Bodies, it was an extension of my dissertation work. And so I've been involved in kind of doing research around this topic now for about 4 or 5 years or so, intimately. And this book served an opportunity for me to tell my story and tell the stories of others outside of the confinement of academia. And that was really appealing to me because in academia, they want you to write a certain way. Certain things don't have weight unless it meets a certain type of criteria. And writing Fat Girls and Black Bodies was really just breaking out of that box and saying, okay, I can now include my own story in this. I can include the stories of other people in this. And I don't need IRB approval to do so, but I can also share the ways by which my own lived experiences kind of impact why I do the work that I do. And so it was like a sense of liberation of my own to kind of put myself out there and tell my own story.
That's really beautiful. Honestly, I think I had not heard of you. You are such it's wonderful to see myself reflected in academia. I don't think I had ever seen someone who actually was able to do the research on our experiences as a fat person and as a fat Black person, so often pushed into the margins, right? As if we don't truly exist. And so to have that research and to have it being done by someone who is directly impacted was really powerful for me. I know that in your book, you talk about some of the other people who inspired you, or names that you wanted to uplift, or other movements. I'm curious, how did you go about doing that, or what inspired you to bring other people onto the book?
Yeah, I mean, the name of the book is Creating Communities of Our Own. And I kind of felt like this was, even though I was the person that was writing it, it really did spring from this place of finding community. And I wanted to write a book that if I had any way, right, to kind of amplify the voices of people who have come before me or people who are already out here doing this work, I wanted to be able to do that. And so I got together one day. It was a simple Facebook post, I think. And I said, I want people to be involved. Who do you know? And the names came, right? The names came and the links came, and I was able to kind of really comb through what people had gave. And I was like, oh no, we're not going to cut none of this. Put it all in the book and find ways to tie that theme back to what community stands for. And so for me, I was like, yeah, I'm here for this. That whole chapter that really highlights community work, it's just about everybody else. Right. And I didn't have, there were no qualms that I had within myself about doing that. I think, one of the lies that's often told in society, particularly in United States type culture, is that there's only room for one. Right? If it's you that's getting the spotlight, you got to make sure that you protect that, because there's always somebody else that can take that from you. But what I say is that there's room for everybody if we want there to be room for everybody. And so, I made intention to include everybody, because everybody probably needs a connection somewhere. And I thought that was important.
You bring up a really good point around the need for community. I feel like for my own journey in my fat justice, fat liberation journey, was also sparked by finding community. And I think back to when I was younger, what would I tell younger me who felt so alone and so isolated, and you talk about that in your book as well, of like some of the first experiences that you had of like when you realized you were fat, or when you saw yourself through your family members' eyes and things. I'm curious, what for yourself, like how has your work helped you work through some of the past things, right? Like, what would you say to young Joy and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting is that somebody asked me a very similar question earlier today about the process of writing the book and kind of revisiting those spaces. And I was telling them that I think it's really cool to be able to hold your past and your present simultaneously, right? Like being able to look back at my younger self and say, we made it, right? Like being able to look back at my younger self and say, see, it did get better. There's a sense of like, even during the process of writing this book, there was like a sense of healing through closure, right? Mm-hmm. Because there were times when nobody else advocated for me. And there was times where I felt very much alone as I was growing up in my younger years, right? And now having the knowledge and the wisdom that I do about fatphobia and anti-Blackness and how they all kind of play a part, it makes it a bit more understandable as to why things played out the way that they did. But I'm also in that space of like just feeling grateful that I was able to make it through, right? Mm-hmm. And that there's something that blossomed out of this experience, right? And I'm not the person that I don't subscribe to the way of thinking like, oh, you had to go through this so that you can get here, because that's not my lane, right? But I think that having went through those things, it helped to inform me where I am now, right? And that I can reach back and say, yeah, it gets better. But then also, I see myself in younger generations, right? So there's that sense of being able to now go to somebody who is or who was a younger Joy and say, hang in there, right? Or give you strategies on how to navigate, because, I think that we all need those things. And so definitely a place of healing for me, and a place of just perseverance.
Right. It's interesting. I'm wondering, let's wonder if we could take some time to just like name some of the things that young, fat, Black girls and femmes kind of experience. What are some of the things that you found in your research or just an experience? And I think too.
I think one of the biggest things was like adultification. I wasn't allowed to be a kid. My clothes said I wasn't allowed to be a kid, right? I was shopping in the misses or women's section of clothing, when I was nowhere near an adult. Right. Oh. And I think that you kind of lose a certain sense of innocence because there's a responsibility that's put on you. Like oftentimes we talk about what it looks like to be mammified in these spaces. But that happened to me at a very young age. I was looked at as the responsible one. I was the one that was supposed to look out for everyone else. And I'm the middle child of two sisters. So it was always weird to me that it wasn't my older sister, but everybody would push that on me. I'm the one that takes one for the team, that sort of thing. I think that, fat Black girls also deal with bullying as much as it exists in certain spaces. And, and just uglification. There's a lot of things that I think when you're younger, everybody says like, well, kids are just cruel. But kids get that from somewhere, right? So society is grooming, this sense of who matters, who doesn't, who's accepted, who's not accepted. So I think like, particularly in my life, like I dealt with bullying. I dealt with, uglification. I dealt with being mammified. I've dealt with adultification, these extra responsibilities being put on me. Grateful and thankful I didn't grow up in the years of cyberspace and in school, right? Because I have no idea what that would have looked like for me. Yeah, I mean, I think, in some ways, you're the fat friend, you're the funny fat friend. I've been the funny fat friend. I've been the third wheel fat friend. I've also been like the enforcer fat friend, right? So you're supposed to be the strong one. You protect everybody else, that sort of thing. Like, I was never just allowed to be me, right? Like, there was always a narrative that was being written about who I was supposed to be based on what I look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that came from peers, that came from teachers, that came from family members. So I mean, I'm curious to hear, some of the things that you would name, but off the top of my head, those are definitely some that stick out.
Yeah, as you were talking, it just reminded me of like so many experiences. I think, the first time that I started shopping at like Lane Bryant and Ashley Stewart, because those were the only stores that like really held my sizes, and I was a child, right? Because they're not on also cost, right? So like it's not just being fat, and being in Black, it's also for me growing up poor and needing to find affordable clothing too. Um, and one moment, I think I have a small lag. There we go. All right, here I am. So, growing up poor, I remember some of the first times I shopped at Lane Bryant and Ashley Stewart, and I just felt so, I don't know, like I felt like I wasn't myself. I felt like I wasn't a kid. I felt like just so fearful. I didn't get to be connected to people of my age. And I already knew that I was fat. I already was bullied. And I didn't wear the clothes that they could wear. And the strain that that put on my relationship with my own mother, who my mom was not fat. And so we just like had a different experience. And so I always felt like I was an adult, or I had to be put in an adult space. And then it also makes me think of how as my body grew, the way that older men would look at me, and then the way that adult women would try and protect me, but also kind of make me feel like it was my fault. I think that is like was a constant thing, that I felt like it was my fault for being this way. It was my fault for inappropriate men in the way that they would talk about my body or the things that they would do. And that type of anxiety to be so hyper visible as well as to be invisible at the same time, just put so much stress on yourself as a child.
Yeah.
And I think the intersection of being, it's also for myself, I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non-binary. When I was growing up, I didn't know that yet. But growing up with a marginalized gender, being Black, being fat, you are coming into this world where you are coming into a world where you are in an abusive relationship with the state, with the medical industry, with the media industry, clothing, food, all of these things, and you have to negotiate at every single day, in every single way, your own humanity, and like own personal growth while you're doing that. And that is just so much to put on children and ourselves. And so it's such a heavy thing to hold, that I don't know how you do that without community. I don't know how you heal from that and negotiate and navigate that without community. So I know community was really big for me. I think one of my first fat friends in college, and just having a friend that I could share clothes with, was like a huge thing. I just wasn't as alone. I don't know. Have you had an experience like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, all of my friends, my sisters, they were all smaller bodied. And for a good, I don't know, maybe the first 5 to 7 years of my life, me and my oldest sister, we shared clothes. And I remember what it felt like when I couldn't do that anymore. Like, I remember what it felt like. I remember how, sometimes my sisters would react when I would try their stuff on, and they would tell me like, you're going to stretch it out. That type of feeling of like, man, I don't even have anybody that I can legitimately connect with. And in some ways, like that built my resilience, because then I was able to kind of find ways to like live and thrive amongst mixed company. Right. And I seen that Sabrina, she wrote in the chat about being the purse watcher at the club. I was her. I remember, right? Like everybody give me your coats, everybody give me your things. And then they would go out and they would dance or whatever. And I was sitting there holding this stuff, right? Because that's kind of where you're often pushed, in that space. And I think now I actually like often now I still don't really have anybody to share clothes with, which kind of sucks, because it would be great to try some things. And I see some things online and I'm like, woo, and I would like to wear it. But I do have people now that I don't have to explain myself to, right? I do have people now that, if I were to call and say, this happened because of this, and this, I was being treated this way at the doctor's office, people would understand it and they would get it, right? And they would be empathetic towards me in a way that they understand it because they live it, and not like, oh man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like, you understand what I'm saying. So
the empathy, the sympathy, and that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to fill into the sad fat girl stereotype, right? Like I constantly have that in your mind, and so it's like I want someone to know what I'm experiencing, not just like feel sad for me.
Right. And so, I mean, I think community for me, by way of just, I think, social support, has meant a whole lot. Like you mentioned earlier about like how we came to know each other. Seeing other fat women and femmes like start their own businesses and kind of do their own thing inspired me, right? Like it was a way for me to be like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Okay, they can do it. They can get themselves together. Like maybe there's something there for me too. And then like being part of that community where I remember in the beginning, so Jay Mobley, who is the founder of Fat Mermaids, we used to talk on Instagram all the time. Like, girl, how are you getting your followers? How are you doing this? How are you doing that? But it made me feel good, and it made me feel included in knowing like we were both working towards the same goals, and like we didn't fear one another, right? Nor did we feel threatened by one another. It was like really just a space of support. And so, I mean, there are certain things I just wouldn't trade for the world. Like I love the community that I found, and knowing that, if we needed to reach out, we could, right? Like there's truly a blessing in that. And so to your point, yeah, I've found quite a few people that kind of give me the support that I'm looking for and that I need in the community that I'm definitely grateful to have met.
Yep. I love Fat Mermaids. I think, you have the Fat Mermaids clothing, and then you also have Chez Monique, Fat Mermaids, who also lives in the DMV. And so that's amazing. It's just great to see reflections of ourselves. And one thing that also, can we just give a shout out to the librarian on this chat?
Yeah, I know.
This list of
going hard, okay?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just like, okay, have I read that? Like I need to add this to my list. So
exactly.
Feel free to just want to let folks know, feel free to ask a question or a topic that you want us to discuss. You can press ask a question. We're also looking in the chat if you have any comments you want to make. Yes. So I'm curious, maybe switching gears a bit. You talked about, what it feels like to see other fat Black femmes start their businesses and do their things. And recently with the election and a lot of things, people are starting to talk about the impact of fat women in organizing and in liberation and the election and just all the things that make our community better. I'm curious, how are you experiencing that? How does that feel for you? Are there any examples recently of fat women rising up and getting recognition that you want to shout out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most notable person to this point would probably be Stacey Abrams,
Right.
and the work that she was doing in Georgia. But then come to find out, she was also in collaboration with other organizers who also don't necessarily live in smaller bodies, right? So
Right.
shout out to them. It's awesome to see, because I think sometimes we lose sight. Like if you live on social media, like sometimes you lose sight that things are actually happening on the ground. And that's one of the reasons why I love the work that you do, because being able to know that there are people who are very visible physically in communities doing work matters, and it matters so much, so much. And so just being able to see those people and know that they're out there, and know that they are talking to individuals, they're interacting with people, they're connecting in very old school ways, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Outside of like social media, and like social media may be the thing that kind of amplifies the voices or the visibility of it, but it's not the work itself, right? And so those are the people that kind of first come to mind as far as like the election and everything. Outside of that, I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I can add some. My day job is with Working Families Party, and so we work to build the multiracial political party for the left. And I'm so grateful to be a part of, like, when I think of Georgia, I think of like Amy Castanel, who organizes with Working Families Party and New Georgia Project. I think of Rhea Thompson, who's been doing election defense across the country, and in Georgia with organization CPD. I think of Kayla Reed, who has been a part of creating, building, and sustaining the Electoral Justice Project, a part of the movement for Black Lives, and people that I've been able to see do amazing work this year. And also, at a time in Black movement when folks had a lot of questions about this electoral work, these folks have been pushing us forward and showing us ways that we can fight for freedom by every means necessary, has been really amazing, and is a part of the reason why I'm in this work now. And so I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And there's some comments down there around, you can find out more about Stacey Abrams. You can also look into the Movement for Black Lives and EJP, the Electoral Justice Project. One thing about being a fat Black person, whether in electoral work, in movement work, I remember you were featured as a part of, what does it mean to be a fat Black person as an ED? Was that, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think of, or maybe in a doctoral space. I'm curious, like when we come into these boardrooms, right? Like these places that are usually dominated by cishet white men, and being so much of an aversion to like what society is supposed to mean of being a powerful person. I'm curious if you have different advice for folks who are going into these spaces, being fat Black people.
Advice. I don't know if I would necessarily take this as advice, because it's probably not prescriptive to what other people would say. But I would say take up space.
Yep.
And I would say take up all the space. Because if they accept you or if they reject you, like that space is still yours, right?
Okay.
One of the things that I think that I found being in these different spaces, particularly in academia, right? Like I had someone tell me, like, you don't want to be the Black person that studies Black things. But I am the Black person who studies Black things.
Okay.
And my thing is, if that's what matters to me, then that's not for me to adjust. That's for other people to adjust to. Like that's not my problem. right? And so I think, you know, spending a lot less time in conformity or in assimilation, because it doesn't get you anywhere. Ultimately, it's not going to get you where you want to be, right? Like if you want to be that scholar who studies marginalized identities, if you want to be that professional that brings up how marginalized people are not being adequately cared for, like you're never going to be that person that you see yourself as assimilating with the masses.
Right.
So you might as well just take up the space while you're there.
Might as well.
Right? Because what's going to wind up happening is you're going to get frustrated. And you're going to get frustrated because you're being forced to conform to something that you don't want to conform to. So ain't no sense in smiling and giggling with them, you know, only to get to a point to where you are frustrated. If they don't accept you the first time, right? If they don't accept you in step 1, they're not going to accept you in step 50. Right. And I think sometimes what we tell ourselves in these spaces is that, oh, just give them time. Oh, it takes work, right? You just got to give them a little at a time, little by little by little by little. And what winds up happening is that you invest your time and energy in all these little by littles only to get to the big axe that's going to come one way or the other, and they still deny it. And they deny it because they were never on track to accept it in the first place. And so for me, what I've learned to do, right, is to be myself and to take up space. And it is what it is, right? Like I was offered an opportunity to write this book from being featured in the Huffington Post piece about everything that you know about obesity is wrong. And literally there was 2 sentences about me in the piece and a big picture. So when they sent the thing and said, oh, we read about you in the Huffington Post piece and we wanted to know if you were interested in writing a book, I was like, how, Sway? How? Like there's literally 2 sentences, right? But I'm of the, you know, I am convinced, right, that when you want to do something, when your heart is turned and purpose towards something, that the earth will yield to you accordingly. Like there was no, you know, 2 sentences don't really situate anybody to be able to write a book, right? And I'm honored for the opportunity and grateful for the opportunity to have been offered this opportunity to write. But you know, I was unapologetic. If I would have assimilated into those spaces, I'd have got lost in the shuffle.
Right. We have a couple questions from the audience. I'll just do first come, first serve. So the question was, how do we feel about cheering up compliments? I know my best friend gets sad about her weight. When I try and cheer her up, she said it feels backhanded. Any advice from Tony? And, you know, Tony, I'm hearing your intention. And, you know, I feel like I've been that friend because I often have to, it depends on the cheering up, right? There's a lot that I'm coming to the plate with. And sometimes when people are trying to quote unquote cheer me up, sometimes it feels like they're negating the experience I'm having, right? Like I'm not currently experiencing oppression or like that, because my sadness sometimes isn't always from me. It's because the world is, you know, it doesn't make space for me, right? And people consider me undesirable, and I experience that so much. And so for me, when folks want to help me feel better, I need folks to also name the experience I'm having and being like, that is real, right? And I know that it can be uncomfortable because we're trying to navigate self-love in a society that tells us not to love ourselves. And so there are going to be some days when I'm not as confident. Like my social media handle is Fat Fairy Godmother, and there are days where I do not feel like a fairy godmother, and I know that can make other people uncomfortable. And so just to add that little piece of nuance around when we're trying to cheer our friends up. But I think I have a list of more. I'm curious, Joy, what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, sometimes, so I had to learn this. I'm a fixer internally, right? If people tell me problems, my mind automatically jumps to like, how can we fix this? How can we make this better? And sometimes people don't want to be fixed, right? They don't want a solution. Sometimes they just want you to bear witness, right? Sometimes they just want a hug. And learning to kind of be present with individuals in that space can be a lot more helpful than trying to give them a solution, particularly if it's a solution to a problem that you don't fully understand. And so, kind of, piggybacking off of what Makia said, oftentimes when people are sad about their weight, it's not just the weight, right? Nothing in society, like we don't learn in vacuums. When we talk about weight, we also align that oftentimes in society, generally with success, with healthy relationships, with good jobs, with all of those things. And so, there is also a possibility that when your friend is getting down about their weight, they're also getting down about having success, about having a decent love life, about, all the things that society says is due to you in a smaller body. And so you kind of swooping in with that good intention of saying, hey, just cheer up, right? That seems it's almost minimizing their issue, right? Because you don't see the enormity of it because you're not them. And if you're not living that same thing, it's hard to grasp that. And so, I can understand why your friend would also, say that sounds somewhat backhanded, because it's not that easy to just cheer up, right? If somebody told you that you were getting ready to lose all the good things in your life, right? And somebody said, hey, just cheer up, it'll get better. You'll be like, are you? Like, what? Like, you would be offended by it. But that's because you understand the weight of that. And so, sometimes it's good just to show up. And I'm, also of the persuasion that asks people, like, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
What do you need? What do you need right now? And if they can answer that, if they can name it, then I'm more than happy to offer and give, what they're asking for. But that's always a good place to be too.
Yeah. Tony added a little bit more context, saying it's mostly boys. I tell her it doesn't matter if guys don't ask her out because she's more than that. And she said it's different being 250 pounds plus, because they're already crossing her out without getting to know her, and said thanks for the help. Yeah, love is such a thing. It's a thing because there's, at one sense, it's like, forget those people, right? Because they don't love you. They don't, know when to get up from the table when love is no longer being served, right? Nina Simone. Yes. And that stuff really hurts. Mm-hmm. It still hurts because they are crossing you out, and things don't happen in a vacuum. And it is work to continue to show up and be open to love. And so the world will have us think that there's no one out there that will that can see the beauty in you. The world will also have you think that you don't deserve love unless you love yourself. And we have to dispel those lies. And we also always have to continue to keep ourselves open to love. But, there's my grandma calling. We also have to keep ourselves open to love. But that's a really real experience. And knowing that people be crossing you out. I think I was talking to someone today about that, of like, I have to unlearn all the things of like, I'm used to people either, being the fat friend, of being desexualized, of people being like, they care for me, but like only in a certain kind of way. I'm used to not even being considered a like sexual being to other people or a romantic option to folks. It's almost as if like you're always someone's sister or aunt in the room. And I have to try and learn, what does love really look like outside of that, and make sure I don't accept things that are not love just because I need that affirmation and attention.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, again, kind of going back to Tony's question, is like, I think that it's easy for people to be like, oh, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it if guys aren't, if they're not interested. But, if you grew up with an expectation for your life, right? I'm a cisgender woman. I want to have kids one day, right? Like, I'm watching the door kind of close, right? As people keep passing me by, keep crossing me out. And that's hurtful, right? There's like things that I want to be able to do, right? So again, it's this idea of like, it's not a big deal. Like somebody will come by, get you somewhere, and you're like, where? When? Like, like I don't want to be 40. I don't want to be 42 having children. Like I need somebody to find me attractive now. Like, what is the big deal, right? That sort of thing. And so yeah, sometimes it's just good to ask, like, what is it that you need right now? Like, they know that you're not going to bring, someone on a horse and like, I have this person for you, right? Like, it's not, but at the same time, it's just good to, sometimes people just need to work their own way through it. Like, there's a lot of things I cry through that I know that when it's all said and done, I'm going to get up and do what I need to do. But I need that space, right? I need that space to cry it out. I need that space to be frustrated about it. I need that space to be, to be upset. And then I'm going to gather myself.
Yep.
I'm going to gather myself and I'm going to do it. But if I'm in that place of being upset and crying it out and people are like, get over it, it's not a big deal, that only makes things worse. Right? So.
Yes. Also, I think for folks who consider themselves friends and allies to fat people, we can reflect. I think it's important for folks to do your own self-reflection, asking for consent and asking like, how do you want support? And then also like, how many relationships have you had with fat people? I think sometimes people, because they like me as a person, they assume that they are like a fat ally and they're open to these things. And I'm like, how many times do you, proposition a fat person for a date in public? How many people, other small friends that you have do that? And how many times do you talk about that? Is really important to reflect on. And then also, sometimes like I have friends who just like help me love on me, of like a friend who's an artist, like was like, I'll do a photo shoot for you, right? Like when I'm not feeling so awesome in my body, or drawing me, or like the different things that help me feel better, that we can do platonic things with each other that help us love on each other. But I've seen some more questions coming in. Do we think there's a significant difference, easier, harder, to being fat woman in different racial communities in the USA or even the world? And that's coming from Lorraine.
I mean, I think that, okay, so it's really hard for me to answer that question as it relates to the whole world, because that's not my experience.
Right.
What I can tell you is that racism, anti-Blackness, and fatphobia run very deep in the United States, in this country. And it's hard to be Black and fat here. Extremely hard. I don't know to what degree or to what extent. I mean, I am connected to other people in other places in the world, but I don't think I have a big enough grasp on their personal experience to compare the experiences.
Right. I mean, I think that we have to recognize, when you think about the world, anti-Blackness is worldwide. And you have to look at why in seemingly every community, the darkest people in that community, the people who are Black in that community, and disabled community, and queer community, and trans community, it is consistently the Black community within there being the most marginalized, because anti-Blackness can still come up. And so when you are trying to be anti-fat phobic or supporting fat liberation, you can't support all fat people if you are not also dealing with anti-Blackness. So I can speak from my own cultural things around being Black, but also holding that the intersection of that makes that experience really difficult without needing to play oppression Olympics of who has it worse. That does bring me into one of the other questions here, addressing the issues of small fat versus large fat. When thinking about oppression Olympics, and to also help folks, Roxanne Gay wrote a book about being fat, and there was, and I'm sure our librarian will add it to the links here. But in that, she references a scale around fatness. small fat, mid fat. I think, and Joy, please feel free to help me. I know that there was super fat and things like that, and ways are categorized. Say it again, love.
Infinity fat.
Infinity fat, right. And so in the fat community, when we're talking about who is most marginalized or who takes up space or who we need to uplift, there's a reason for, I know that as a larger fat, we have uplifted that mainstream media often centers folks who identify or who could be considered as a small fat. Yeah, I'm curious, Joy, do you have any comments on that?
So I can't see that question. So what was the question?
Sure. So the question was, can we address the issues of small fat versus large fat? So I just was adding some context to that.
Oh, okay.
Like, what do you think about that? The small fat, large fat things there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you are somebody who ascribes to fat liberation and fat acceptance, and you are a smaller fat, then I think that you also should understand where you are, right? Kind of like where your position on that spectrum by which you just laid out, and uplift the people who are often most marginalized. Like, I don't think that it's I think people make a lot about it, like on social media, but to me, it like makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I understand how colorism plays out in the Black community, right, and in society as a whole, if I understand that I'm brown skinned and I'm standing here for the liberation of Black people, why wouldn't I push them to the center, right? Like when we care about the people who are most marginalized, everybody will get taken care of as a result. And so, to me, there is a reality, right, when it comes to access, when it comes to privilege, that does revolve around the body of your size, or the size of your body, but then also the shape of your body, mm-hmm. right? And I think that if we say that we're committed to liberation, right, because there are some people who are not. There are just some people who, they want nice clothes, and that's it. And that's their choice to make. I'm not knocking that, but I'm saying that if you position yourself to be about liberation and about social justice as it relates to fat bodies, and you are in a smaller body, right, we should be finding ways to advocate for people who are in larger bodies, because if we advocate for them, our needs will be taken care of, right? Yep. It's easier that way. It just doesn't, trickle down whatever of any kind, right. Doesn't work, right? And we've learned that firsthand. And so it doesn't make sense to kind of keep perpetuating that idea that, if smaller fats make it in, they're going to then make room for larger fats. No, they won't. That's why body positivity is what it is now, right? Because people were able to come in and then they shut out the people who actually paved the way. And so that's my stance on it, without, going deep about that.
I have the body that I'm in now. When I first started in the fat acceptance and fat liberation movement, I was wearing maybe a size 20, 22. I was wearing size 22. And
same,
right?
Same.
And now I'm wearing a size 26, at times 28, depending. And there was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know. It's just, you're not going to come to me, you're not going to come to me as maybe wearing a size 12 or 16, telling me that you understand everything that someone who is a larger size does. Because I know that at a size 22, I didn't understand nearly half of the things I was going to experience as a size 26. The type of the notes that I had to make, the decisions I have to make around going out, being in public, engaging with people. My friends ask me if we want to go to a restaurant. I need to look at a picture to see what kind of seats there are, because I know that these seats they're not going to match me. Furniture that I buy, and also just being out in public. The ridicule, the bullying on the street is at such a level that's so different being in this body. And so I know that there were things that I didn't really think about. And so I want to hold and support my like small fat fam to recognize that there might be more understanding there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, for sure. I think that we all have space to learn. I mean, there are things that I don't know as a cisgender person, right, about what it means to be part of the LGBTQ community, but I'm holding space for space to learn, right? And I don't know. I think I would never jump into that space and say, I know what it's like to be, like, I know what it's like to be you. I know what it's like to go through those things. I can sit and humble myself and say, teach me, show me, right? And I think sometimes that's where a lot of like that indignation comes from when we start talking about larger fats and smaller fats, is because, you know, there's this sense of like, I know what you're going through and I've been here, and why can't we just all get along and, you know, we're all on the same team. And I don't deny that. But I think that, you know, we got to hold space for that education, space for that empathy.
Yeah. We have a question here from Monica. She says, when I had my daughter, I was very conscious about ensuring I fed her with positivity about herself, as I felt that the world would most likely not do so. As my daughter began to put on weight, I refused to allow people to call her fat, as it seems like a negative description. I see this word is now embraced more often. Question, how would you suggest little Black girls embrace or not the term fat?
So what I would say is that I think one of the best things we can do for generations who are coming up behind us is to give them the liberty to define things for themselves. We kind of take away, right? So we take away the negativity that's associated with the term fat, and I use it as a descriptor, right? Which is now seen as a way to like empower other people, right? But I would not, how do you say? I wouldn't necessarily prescribe, right? Like, oh, if you feel good about your body, this is what you would call it, right? Mm-hmm. Call yourself this, right? Because I feel like that's how we get into boxes in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I would want to give them education around the terms, and then let them decide what it is that they want to, you know, what they want to call themselves, decide how they want to be able to embrace themselves. I had someone speak about this by way of terms that like young people are identifying themselves by. And the speaker, what he was saying, he was like, there are things that I've never heard of, right, that this younger generation is identifying themselves by. Like, if you want to keep your finger on the pulse of like what's happening in society, like tap into the young people, right? And I think that for me, that's important, right? Because I know what it's like to be told, this is what you should do. This is what you should call yourself. And I'm not against anybody calling themselves fat. I call myself fat. But I think that for me, I think education is better, right? Mm-hmm. Explain to them, let them know, and then kind of give them that space to define what it is that they want to call themselves. Because I feel like that's where the most power will come from. And that's what they'll use when they feel themselves, you know, pushed up against the wall, or when they want to stand in their own identity, is to give them that choice.
Right. That is so important. I think of someone who's actually in our chat right now, and I'll bring up their question next. LL brought me to this. It was a queer and trans POC doula training, and birth worker training. And one of the best things about that training was we took time to name the different body parts, right? Because we're learning medical things, and we're like, all right, let's name these for ourselves, right? Especially with folks who experience a lot of body dysmorphia and all these other things. And we got to name them what felt comfortable for the space, and then made an agreement to use those words to talk about bodies. And I think that it's really important for young Black people to be able to name their body, name their body size, name their gender, name, you know, how do you, and also allow for it to change, mm-hmm. right? Allow for it to change. There was a time when plus size was what I wanted to be called, or big girls, or, you know, plush, or remember when Monique came out with Fat Girls, PH, the PHT.
Pretty hot and tempting.
Yeah. That it's okay if the way that we name ourselves changes, and to allow ourselves to feel empowered with just the act of naming. And also that conversation is also could let that person know that like I'm open to you having agency here, and like I want to know what you're thinking about that,
Yeah, for sure.
So let's see, I'm gonna go to I think one of these questions was for the librarian who's been putting in a lot of answers. Said, I love these resources. I was wondering if you had any info, stories, books, media about fat phobia within the medical context. Specifically, the only reason I've not had a kidney transplant is because I'm fat, and it has literally come down to losing weight. And I'm like, wow, you're asking such a great person, because you've literally been a part of articles on this topic already.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of work that's been done already on those types of information. I know Marilyn Wan was one person that was doing her own. So Marilyn Wan is the author of Fat So. She's kind of known as a pioneer as it relates to like fat studies. And so she did a lot of work on discrimination around weight bias. Not too long ago, there was a story, a news article about a woman that was circulating, how she kept going to the doctor and they told her to lose weight and she wound up having tumors. There was another story about a woman, same type of situation, but she wound up passing because she had cancer. So there's a lot of that. I mean, I think I have my own story as it relates to weight discrimination and how I was treated when I needed to have my gallbladder out, how they wouldn't see me at first, and then they decided to see me and said some things that they didn't need to say. And I think that, within fat communities, these conversations come up often, how people are denied care. They're denied, they're denied the ability to thrive because doctors won't. They won't operate on you. They won't give you the knee replacement. They won't give you, they won't give you the things that you're asking for, and they base it on weight, right? They base it on the ability to be able to give you anesthesia and different things like that. I know that there's a book that's forthcoming that kind of talks about this too, but that won't be out, I think, for another year. So there are resources out there that kind of definitely align with this, because fat phobia in the medical field, I think, is probably one of the most damaging practices that happen to fat people. We know that fat people delay care as a result, right? So they're more likely, you're not seeing them until you absolutely, until they're not able to care for themselves anymore and they're sick, or it's too late to kind of give them any type of preventative care. But part of that is because they experienced weight bias when they went the first time and they said they wouldn't return. So a lot of resources around that.
Yeah, I experience like the medical industry is like, I think medical fat phobia, I look at it as violence, because there are so many people who are harmed, people who have led to, untimely deaths due to fat phobia in the medical industry. And then also the constant just medical industry, like the idea of being healthy, or the idea of, obesity in itself, or your body mass index, your BMI, has been used to validate so much harm to our community. And so I just want to name that, like, that. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that, LL. Like, there's just lists of stories. And I think that there are books that we can be reading and our community and advocating. I know one time I asked a friend to come to the doctor with me because I had a new doctor and I was trying to talk to them about my acid reflux issues, but they continued to say that I just needed to lose weight. And so I was like, I'm going to bring someone with me because I needed the accountability. And that helped the doctor shift their perspective.
Yeah.
Or even having a doctor write down, like, I need you to mark that you are, ignoring my requests for support, because you are like legally required to do so. If you're just going to keep saying this, or because the idea that weight loss is not a solution for many people. Weight loss is not always, especially for the amount of weight you need to lose, it is not a solution. It is not reality for many of us in our community. And we need folks to see us outside of that. But yeah, there are some other questions here. So I know we're coming down to our time. So let's see. How do we feel? Let's like switch gears a bit. How do we feel about TV shows like 600-Pound Life and other dieting shows? Is it like, quote, this is showing how some people live and give insight, end quote, or do you see it more as only showing the stereotypical side of it and using us as money catchers?
The latter. I think that shows like My 600-Pound Life, The Biggest Loser, they're all exploiting the lived experience of fat people. And I think that if the end goal always ends at a person being smaller, then you know that they're not really interested in like, hey, this is how we live our life. So for my dissertation, I did a content analysis on My 600-Pound Life and The Biggest Loser. And what a lot of, what they don't point out, I guess, in the show, right? One is that oftentimes My 600-Pound Life, when you actually watch the show, these are people who have support systems. Now technically, what you see is the things that society tells you that fat people shouldn't have. So these fat people have support systems. These fat people are often married. These fat people are often living their life. They're going to work. They're doing things that everybody else is doing. They have a very normal life. But then you have the rhetoric that comes behind it. They feel like they're a monster, right? So it shapes them as though they're inhuman. It shapes them as though they cannot stop themselves from indulging in a practice that ultimately is going to kill them. And then, they go through this process of My 600-Pound Life in particular. They go under weight loss surgery and then they get smaller. But even in that sense, by the time the show ends, right, these people who have lost like a couple 100 pounds or whatever, by all points in society, if you didn't watch them on TV, you would still consider them like, this is what society is rejecting now, right? And so there's a lot of that nuance that's missing in these stories. My Biggest Loser, people are pulling trucks, they're doing obstacle courses, they're doing all of these things, all in fat bodies. Until the show is over, when they are whatever, they go home for those couple months and they come back and they're, extremely thin, in some cases problematically thin. You see them doing this work in a fat body, all while confessing that they can't do this stuff in a fat body. And so, there's this constant contradiction about their lived experience. It's not really about showing, what you can do, right? There's an end goal in mind. And that end goal is that if they're smaller, their life will become better. Right. And that's usually the story that's told. Oh, now that I lost this weight, I can run again. I can play again. I can do this. But I just seen you on TV 3 shows ago and you was running and you was playing. Right. Like, I don't know too many people who pull whole food trucks. Like, they literally have people on this show pulling food trucks in their fat bodies. And you don't look at it because that's not what the focus of the show is. The focus of the show is that they become smaller, which to me is exploitative, right? Like, to me, that is just another way to say that people live a better life when they're in smaller bodies. And that's why people watch the show. I mean, research even would go to say that there were 2 research projects that were done that the outcomes were that people had a greater disdain for fat people after watching The Biggest Loser than they did before. Right. So I don't think that those shows actually aid in individuals understanding our lived experience any better. It really aids in saying, oh, yeah, these people really shouldn't be as big as they are. And like, if they can do it, why can't everyone else?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, said well. It is so triggering when I think of those shows, when I think of it brings up a trigger around like, okay, if I just do what they do, my life will be so much better. And it is so not true. And I just appreciate that point of like, you're right. People are out here. We're out here doing things in fat bodies, yet being told that we cannot.
Right.
And thank you so much for that.
Yeah. I mean, if just to name drop real quick,
Yes.
Amanda G, she's a weightlifter. Kanoliani Patterson, she's a weightlifter. Courtney Marshall, she's active. She does a lot of fitness instruction. So there are people who are out here that's actually doing things in their body, right? Like you don't have to be smaller just because you want to work out. And you don't have to aim towards weight loss. Mm-hmm. To be like, it's okay. It's okay for you to move it. Like we all can move our bodies in our own ways, and we don't have to pigeonhole ourselves that it doesn't count if we're not getting smaller.
Right. I think that brings us to this other question of advice for fat folks who are staunchly anti-diet, but have fat and fatter friends who are still enmeshed in hurt by diet culture. I want to be supportive, but it's difficult. And it's interesting because when you're talking about we don't have to focus on losing weight, I think the reason why is because of the ways that diet culture can be so harmful. I know that we're often told how, for folks who maybe haven't heard of this, we're often told that, dieting is the way of the world. Everyone needs to diet. Fat people should always be on a diet. And that is normal and healthy, when many of us are taking part in like disordered eating, right? Or like practicing starving ourselves and these other things to get this goal of losing weight. And so I consider myself an anti-diet person too. And for me, that just means that like, one, I think that the idea of dieting in itself is harmful. And I believe in intuitive eating, in eating what my body wants when it wants. And the goal of actually being more in touch with my body around what I need and not shaming myself. And I've also had friends who are fat like me and not anti-diet. And they sometimes bring up their diets, they talk about it, they body shame themselves, and it can be very triggering for me too. Curious Joy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing, and I tend to tap out of those types of conversations. Like I have people who are fatter than me, who are the same size as me, who still participate in diet culture and stuff, and it's interesting because now having written a book, people who are close to me kind of know where I stand, and they still say things, right? And so for me, I tend to ask myself, like, what do you have the bandwidth for? And and if I'm tapping out, I'm tapping out. I'm not having this conversation. I'm not going to do this. I need to do this. I need to lose weight. I need to, this is getting too big, this, that, and the other. Like, look at me, crickets. Because I think for me, I realize how much emotion, like how much this means to me. And so I have to be mindful of how much labor I'm willing to put into those types of interactions as it relates to that. But I typically do not participate because it never tends to go the way that you're hoping, right? It never tends, like, it's not that I'm so glad you told me this, I'm not going to do it anymore. Like, that never happens. Right. It's usually, I want to do, like, it's about this. No, it's not a problem if you're doing if you want to be healthy. And I'm like, I really don't have time to do a whole dissertation. I don't want to do all of those things. So I realized that your stance on this is different than mine, and I can respect that, but I'm not going to engage.
Right. I mean, live your truth. Live yourself. Be honest about what you want and what's important. I think the moments where I moved forward in my journey were when I saw other people living their truth. I think on on Instagram right now is, I'm trying to remember the name, but I have a friend named Janae, and I don't know if I can say their handles on this platform because they're raunchy, but I can, if folks follow me on Fat Fairy Godmother, MUVA, I'll share it to my story. And I remember Janae was telling me, okay, Charis says I can. So we have, there's Instagram called Niggas Reading Things. There is Black Femme Brunch, and Janae, we went to dinner and we walked into this place and there was these stools, and I looked at them and was like, crap, those stools look so uncomfortable. Those stools are not big enough for me. I'm about to have a horrible evening. And we're with a group of people. And Janae was like, oh, those stools is fat phobic as hell. We need some more, we need different seating. And like immediately was like, oh, we're gonna need better seats. And I remember it was a few years ago. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
What? We don't have to just take what's being dealt with
right.
us. And maybe that's not particularly about diets, but Janae living in her truth, like, changed the way that I thought about myself. And then I remember the next time that I went out with another fat person and I did that because we were going to sit someplace, and that person was like, what? Like, it just was able, right? Like, Janae didn't have to tell me, no, you don't need to, like, didn't have to tell me what to do with my life. Janae lived her truth, honestly, out loud in front of me. And I took from that what I wanted to help me feel better. So right. I think that's where some of that comes from. Let's see. A switch of, like, are there clothing brands that we can identify that are doing the work to include people of all body sizes and shapes? That's a question.
So clothing brands, that are doing the work to include people and bodies of all shapes. So we talked about Fat Mermaids. Super Fit just came out with, they just relaunched their inclusive. It's inclusive. It's for athletic wear. I think they're going up to like 7X or something like that. Right. Universal Standard is probably another one. Shakti, that's how I pronounce it. I don't know if that's really how it's pronounced, but that's how I pronounce it. I absolutely love that brand, and I will tell you why, because they will tailor clothes to your size. Mm-hmm. So I can literally look at something on Shakti and be like, this is cute, but I don't want the sleeves and it needs to be made longer. Oh, and by the way, my waist is this, my hips is this. This is what, like, make it in this and send it to me. And they will do it. So I love Shakti for that. I've gotten a few pieces from them. Sabrina said ModCloth.
ModCloth, I think, yeah, ModCloth I'm curious what size they go up to now. Tabria Majors has a swimsuit line. I've shopped at Eloquy. They just came out with a line that is more affordable, because I think that's my biggest thing with Universal Standard of, like, not being able to really afford.
They are expensive.
And I think an Eloquy I really like for, like, business wear, and they have a more affordable line. You know, the usuals of, like, Torrid and things like that. For me, Torrid was really great when I was in college, and then I kind of grew out of only shopping at Torrid. But I think being in a fat body, you're gonna have to piece what you want and need, right? Mm-hmm. There are going to be some things on Fashion and Figure that has maybe some stretch that, like, I might be able to make work with something from Eloquy. There might be something at Rainbow. Like, I might be able to get some tank tops from Rainbow for an affordable price, but wear a really nice jacket with it that I got at Lane Bryant or something. I look at Reb Dolls. I think they go up to, like, a 3X. They sometimes go to a 4X and a 5X, depending on the sizing.
Women Within is, like, more catalog, but they have a wide variety. I don't know. I got a jacket from there for like $19 or something. I was like, yes. So I do, and that's the other thing too, because sizes differ, because part of this is because everybody wants to be inclusive. But, like, so what a 3X is and Women Within is maybe a 1X and Lane Bryant or or something like that. And so when you look at the scale of like the sizes, like some of this is like, some of it is hit and miss. Like there's some stuff I can buy from Shein. Is that what it's called? I just, listen, I don't look up the I just pronounce it the way it's spelled. So Shein is another brand. Like there's certain things I can buy from there, but I go by the measurements. So if they say that like it's, a 62-inch hip, I'm like, yeah, I can fit into that. Like, and I don't look at the size as much because the size, I would never buy it. And if it's in the size that it was listed in. So I think some of this, like Makia was saying, is that there is this sense of like peace melting that happens within the community, because everybody has different sizes with different rules. And everybody's not necessarily giving you all types of clothes in an inclusiveness, right. I guess. Right. So
it's interesting. The fact that you keep bringing up like, oh, I don't know how it's spelled, is because so much of fat clothing and fat shopping is online. Because a lot of folks won't put our clothes in stores. One of the reasons why I will never shop at Old Navy again is because I remember when Old Navy particularly took their plus size clothes and like put it online. They might have put it back in the store since then, but that for me was really harmful, because I would shop there, and then they decided that like they wanted to create space only, that they no longer wanted fat people in their store. That's what that was the impact for me. And there are many stores that do that right. Won't really carry plus size clothing in the store, but they will have it online. And then that leads to shipping and returning and all of these things, especially if you haven't gotten into sizing yourself yet. And so I just wanted to name that so much of our stuff is only online.
It's an extra barrier for sure. I call them undercover lovers.
Undercover lovers, yeah.
Like they only want to love you in private. They'll ship you your stuff, right? But what sucks about that is that if my size is wrong, I can go back to the store and return it, but I can't get an exchange. I got to wait another 2 to 3 business days for them to send me out something new. And that sucks. I mean, to me, that's a barrier.
That's a barrier. And also not everyone, like I live in DC. I know that when I was living in New York City, I had so much more access to stores, but if you live in a place where they don't have those stores, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to drive really far out. That is when the intersection of class and size come into play. Because if you don't have the money or access, you also don't have these things, and that can add to mental health and emotional health. Being able to dress yourself and, express yourself the way you want to be perceived is a part of that.
Absolutely.
Here, let's see our last question. Yeah. How can you navigate the level of vulnerability it takes in order to seek out and be welcomed in a community or to build one of your own, especially coming from past experiences where you were socially rejected and didn't have many sustaining and supportive relationships with other Black women due to your mother wound? And this comes from Brittany. So yeah, how do we navigate level of vulnerability it takes to join a community or to build a community of fat Black women?
I mean, so I think part of this for me was like I had a small network of people that I trusted. And when they shifted to something bigger, right? So like Magical Fat Black Femmes was like a group that I found on Facebook. But part of that transition happened because other people trusted. So like we kind of trusted as a unit and moved to a place. And so allowing myself to be vulnerable in that moment, to be like, let me see if they're going to let me in this, let me see if I can get in the group. And then having spent some time there, and then saying, okay, I think that I can share, right? Like, and then kind of leap out there. But I think like those levels of vulnerability be different for everyone, based on where you are, based on the spaces that you're coming into. It's hard to trust. I think if you've been rejected in the past, and you haven't, like, aside from doing the work, but like that shit hurts. So, you don't want to find yourself in that space again where you are allowing yourself to be open and getting hurt again. But I also think that it's like one of those risks that sometimes you have to take in order to progress forward, right? And so sometimes it pays to do your homework, right? It pays to kind of, you might find yourself sitting quiet at first just to read the room, read who's around, see how they handle other things, other issues. But that sense of vulnerability and you taking the first step is like a decision that you kind of got to make in order to take the first step. And that's not like to downplay that, but like, I think there are things that you can do. Like I said, if you want to vet a group, if it's you wanted to start something of your own, I think that's internal work. Yeah. Knowing what that looks like to you and like maybe identifying what your barriers are and those things before making a big step. So not only that you are in a space where you can trust, but that you're also in a space where you can be trusted. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the things that I would touch on. Makia, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah. I'll give my last comment. I think the internet space, like being vulnerable can be a catch-22 because sometimes you can find yourself feeling like maybe you're oversharing or with the internet or with people you don't know. I know that I've had to take risks with being vulnerable. Sometimes I just started posting about my own experience and then people started connecting with me, right? Like I started finding more community for folks who agreed with my experience and found, the group that we're both in of Magical Fat Black Femmes on Facebook, and found people like Joy. And so journaling, sometimes maybe it's not, you want to share it with the internet, but you want to start writing your experience down, to get yourself more comfortable about telling your narrative. I think sometimes, when you meet someone, it's okay to ask someone, or I like to compliment someone on things to start that conversation, especially if I see another a fat black femme. I really like your outfit, or, that's also just the way that like Black people talk to each other. So like tapping into that has been really helpful for building community. And yeah, I think it's just, you just have to keep trying and opening yourself up to community and love in that way. And before we head out, I want to give us our last comments. Joy, do you have any, I know that folks within this can purchase the book. So we've been talking about all these topics, and a lot of these things are touched on in this amazing book written by Dr. Joy Cox. And so I push everyone to purchase the book, to share it with a friend. I was going to say, you don't have to leave the screen to buy the book. Holiday season is coming up. Definitely share it with people. And, book clubs, talk about it, post about it. You can also follow both of us on social media. I think you have, is it Fresh Out of the Cocoon? Is that your podcast?
Yes. Media? So my podcast is Fresh Out the Cocoon, which is on all the major platforms, everything but iHeart, because, we ain't balling in followers like that yet. But yeah, you could always Google it and it should pop up for you.
Okay. Yep. And you can follow me at Fat Fairy Godmother. That's MUVA on Instagram and Twitter. And so we'll be sharing other resources, and feel free to, engage with us on that space. Thank you so much to Charis Books for welcoming us here. Y'all have been a great crowd. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been a real gift to our community.